Good afternoon, everyone. I want to invite you and say welcome on behalf of Visionary Philanthropic Consulting. We've got a great group of panelists today, Ava Willis-Barksdale, Carla Willis, and Jeff Shaw, who are going to lead us through a conversation about the opportunities and challenges at historically Black colleges and universities. We are recording this, so you'll be able to get a copy of that at the end of the transmission. And we also have the question and answer feature turned on. So at any time during the course of the conversation, you've got something you'd like to ask our subject matter experts, send it along and we'll weave that into the conversation. Without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen so that we can get the conversation started. I'm also going to turn this over to my esteemed colleague and friend, Ava Willis-Barksdale. And with that, I'll take a back seat.
Good afternoon, everybody, whoever everybody is. I'm sure you can see me, even if I can't see you. We're going to do the best we can with this hour. I have said to others that this could be a 2-day seminar, but we're not going to take 2 days. We're going to begin by introducing ourselves. And I will tell you that I serve as a senior consultant for Visionary. However, I am both graduate of a historically Black college and university. That would be Oakwood. It was Oakwood College when I graduated. It is now Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama. And I serve presently at Lincoln University of Pennsylvania as the Vice President for Advancement and Executive Director for the foundation here. So that's the reason why I can be just barely an expert on this particular topic, but I'm joined by some great colleagues of mine, and I'm hoping that at some point Jeff's audio will work itself out, but we'll go to Carla Willis first so that she can introduce herself and tell us what her connections are.
Thank you so much, Ava. And I also want to thank Visionary Philanthropy for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Both Visionary and the firm that I am principal at, Washburn and McGoldrick, are members of the Giving Institute, which is a members organization of consultants and vendors of various types who work in the philanthropy space. And we all embrace core values of ethics, excellence, and leadership in advancing philanthropy. So I did not attend a historically Black college or university. Unfortunately, I did not. I wish I had. However, I have served as a vice president of advancement at Florida A&M University. And I also currently, in my portfolio of clients, serve a number of HBCU clients. Our firm serves Lincoln University, where Ava, as she just said, is VP for advancement. We also serve Virginia State University. And in the past, we've served Prairie View University, and we've also worked with Spelman University. And so and I, in a previous life before Washburn, served North Carolina Central University. And so I have experience both having served in the Chief Advancement Officer role, but also as a consultant. And I've been with Washburn and McGoldrick for 4.5 years and am a principal of the firm. And
Thank you, Carla.
Here.
Is Jeff, are you able to weigh in now? We can't hear you.
Can't hear you. Houston, we're experiencing some difficulties here.
So here's what we're going to do in the interest of time. You see Jeff's title as Vice President of Institutional Advancement at Harris Stowe State University. We're going to come back to him. He's going to work through his audio issues. We're going to do the slides that we have that lay a context for this conversation. And I'm sure that in that length of time, Jeff will be able to talk out loud to us. How about that? Thank you, Scott. So what we're going to work through in this very short hour is what we know to be HBCU successes, what we also know about trends in fundraising, at least recently with regard to HBCUs. We're going to talk about a little bit of comparative data between graduates of HBCUs versus other graduates, in fact, other Black graduates of non-HBCUs. And then we're going to think about what does that mean relative to philanthropy at HBCUs and how we're looking at the future from that lens or through that lens. Next slide. So I thought that we would start with the definition. There are a lot of people who hear the term, but maybe are not connected to what the actual definition from a public perspective is of an HBCU. So what you see on the screen is an excerpt from the Higher Education Act of 1965 that defined who belonged in that group of colleges and universities. I would want to say that there are a lot of very fine institutions that would not necessarily be considered HBCUs. Currently, there are a number of minority serving institutions. There are a number of Hispanic serving institutions. And I would be remiss not to note that there are tribal colleges as well. What I think is most important is that you would have seen this definition so that you would understand that HBCUs were defined as being founded before 1964 to serve Black Americans, that was the term at the time, African Americans. But I also would want you to know that HBCUs serve students of every ethnic background. But this is how we were established. Next slide. So there are only 102 accredited institutions at this moment, but from that small crowd, there are some notable successes. For instance, you see the number of bachelor's degrees to Black students overall, but then look at the number or percentage of degrees of Black students from HBCUs that graduate in STEM. And then the number of all Black engineers, the number of or percentage of all Black US people, the percentage of all Black lawyers, and the very large percentage of all Black judges who went to HBCUs. So what's critical when you read this information is to understand the contribution that these schools, small as they may be, small in number, but quite the contributors to the American landscape and the world. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about how HBCUs have fared or how they are trying to manage and historically have managed in terms of philanthropy. You'll see that the alumni participation rate over time kind of hovers around that 8 to 10%. While if we go to the next slide, you will see that there are certain HBCUs, many of these you may have heard of, who tend to stay above or have recently reported above that average of alumni participation. I would draw your attention to Spelman in particular, which many of you have heard of, and their average being 34% is significant among HBCUs and actually among institutions of higher education at all. I would also reflect on the fact that Spelman among HBCUs has one of the highest endowment sizes. So this is just to keep it in context. When we get into conversation, Carl is also going to talk about the fact that when you look at, this is 8 out of 30 colleges, and I already told you there are 100 HBCUs. What does that mean? Why is it we are only looking at a few with these reports? Next slide. In fact, the next 2 slides are going to show you about foundation and corporate giving to HBCUs. Fascinating when you look at historically, the averages have been at around about, or just below or just above $1 million in the last 10 years or so. And then suddenly in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, you see a large spike. That should not be a hard thing to understand. We all know what has occurred in the country in the last couple of years, and that there has been a lot of attention being given. In fact, some people just discovering that HBCUs exist, although they've been around since at least 1837. So just want to lay that out there for you. But when you go to the next slide, you will see a similar pattern for corporate giving as well. And while that's great, the question is, what happens after people go back to whatever was normal for them? Or how do we sustain that kind of giving? So we're going to do a little bit more comparative data, and then we're going to get into a bit of conversation. So next slide. This comparative data talks about the actual experience that students tend to have at HBCUs and what a few research engines are beginning to discover. So the first one is about economic mobility. If you know the history, we have always said, and when I say we, those of us who attended HBCUs, that it means so much when you go to and graduate from an HBCU. What you do with that education sometimes is way more than you ever anticipated. So the standard or the average economic mobility change for students across the board from all colleges and universities is about 1.6%. However, the average economic mobility rate for HBCU graduates is 3%. Now, notably, most or many of students who attend HBCUs may be first generation. They may come from families with very little means. And so that 3% is maybe a leapfrog. But I think it's critical when you look at it against the mobility across all colleges and universities to understand the value of an HBCU education. Likewise, the Gallup USA Funds report that was recently done shows that more than twice the number of HBCU grads report that their time at their school provided them with these feelings of support, having a professor that sees them, cares about them, professor who made them excited about learning, and having a mentor or mentors who encourage them to pursue their goals and dreams. So the next slide will be our last slide before we do some talking. And so again, going back to the alumni participation rate, around 10%. Now we're talking about philanthropy. But as you saw in the previous slide, the giving is weighted toward corporations and foundations. However, even with that being the case, just recently, Candid and ABFE released a statistic that said that the average HBCU receives 178 times, that's not a typo, less funding from foundations than the average Ivy League school, and that was in 2019. We are all thrilled that work for or have graduated from HBCUs that there's been a renewed interest in attending HBCUs by African American students. But many of the HBCUs enroll twice as many Pell eligible students as non-HBCUs. So what does that mean? Many of us are experiencing the largest first-year classes that we've ever had. But that means the level of support that's needed, and therefore the amount of fundraising that we have to do to support need-based scholarships, facilities improvements has also risen with that bubble of interest. So with those items being the context, I'm going to invite my partners to talk about their experiences, because I could tell you things, but I am one person. And as you note, HBCUs are there. We are a variety. I'm going to ask Jeff the first question because I think he's worked out his.
I hope so.
Amen. And so,
All right.
Jeff, I will tell you that I met Jeff, or have connected with Jeff for the last couple of years at the HBCU Philanthropy Symposium, hosted by Delaware State University, but actually held in Washington, D.C. And Jeff is right now in Washington, D.C. at the end of the White House Initiative on HBCUs, which is an annual National HBCU Week conference. So I'm going to ask Jeff, if you would, to give us a sense of the variability among HBCUs, and that variability with an eye on, common themes that are emerging, particularly related to philanthropy in our work at HBCUs.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, first of all, and I apologize for my technical difficulties getting on. But yes, so I'm Jeff Shaw, Vice President Institutional Advancement at Harris-Stowe State University. This is my third HBCU, starting at Florida A&M, Texas Southern, Harris-Stowe, but I also worked for a little while at the United Negro College Fund. So my passion for several years has been HBCUs. But to go back to your question, what we have seen, and I'm going to say in the last few years when it comes to philanthropy, is when, particularly when, if you combine COVID-19 with the George Floyd incident that occurred, what happened was a lot of people switched or shifted their initiatives or their funding towards HBCUs. Number one, COVID related funding, because there was a lot of attendance that decreased. So the government stepped in and provided a lot of funds to help with covering tuition fees, but also did some things like forgiving some of the debt that some of the universities had, so they were able to get rid of some of their debt. So that put a lot of the HBCUs in a much better position. Now, when it came to the social injustice and racial inequalities that we saw from George Floyd, what we saw was there were a lot of foundations and corporations that shifted their funding towards social equity and social justice. So they started reaching out to HBCUs in a way that they hadn't before, and started offering funds to the HBCUs, where in the past it was a very difficult process of grant writing and management and things. And one of the things that I saw at my university was foundations were contacting us saying, hey, we're ready to give you X amount of dollars, and we hadn't even submitted a proposal yet, So the thing is, the value in the HBCUs started to emerge. Now, having said that, here it is 3 years later after COVID and the George Floyd stuff. A lot of the universities are thriving under some of the funds that they were given during that time. So it shows that, it's not that the HBCUs weren't worthy of the grants or weren't worthy of the funds. We were very much worthy of the funds that were given to us, and were able to use those in a way that helped the university thrive. But prior to some of those things, it was very difficult to kind of get your foot in the door to receive some of that funding. So we're definitely appreciative of those things. And we're doing things moving forward now to make sure that those dollars keep coming in. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Now that I'm here at the HBCU White House Initiative this week, what we've seen with this White House administration is that there are a lot of initiatives funded by the federal government to just HBCUs, and we're seeing a lot of those dollars, millions of dollars, being poured into building infrastructure, building programs, building strategies to improve HBCUs. So it's very exciting to see a lot of these new dollars that are going to be rolling in. So it's been very helpful.
I want to ask you one more question, Jeff, because you're at Harris Stowe. I would imagine that there are a number of people who have never heard of Harris Stowe. And so I'd love for you to just share some history or some pieces about Harris Stowe and the fact that there are so many on that list of 100 that are not your first, not most people in the population, their first thought. They may have heard of some of like the big five, but they may not have heard of Harris Stowe.
So Harris Stowe is a small HBCU, a small public HBCU. We have about 1,100 students sitting in the city of St. Louis. We're right across the street from St. Louis University. So we're right next to a large major university. Now, the history of Harris Stowe actually goes back to 1857, pre-Civil War. But if you look at the history of Harris Stowe, it started as Harris Teachers College, which was an all-white teachers college. It was not open to African-American students at that time. In 1890, they opened Stowe Teachers College, which was only African-American students at that university. Now you fast forward to about the 1950s, and what they did is they decided to integrate Harris Teachers College and allow African-American students to integrate, and they kind of phased out Stowe Teachers College. When they phased out Stowe Teachers College, they realized because Stowe had a history of doing the same thing, creating teachers in the St. Louis community, they felt like they should merge the two names together into Harris Stowe Teachers College. So that became the Teachers College for, you know, African Americans and Caucasian individuals to go to school. Now, fast forward to 1987. By this time, we had a president named Dr. Henry Givens, and he was doing some really progressive things with the university at the time and growing the university into making it more than just a teachers college. And one of the things that he decided to do was give the university an HBCU designation because it did have roots in starting as an African-American college when you look at the Stowe Teachers College. So we were able to get an HBCU designation in 1987 and became officially an HBCU, which is very different from a lot of other HBCUs that started as an HBCU in the 1890s. So we got our designation in 1987. So when I look at the history of the university and our alumni, depending on how many years you go back, you may be looking at a Harris Teachers College graduate, a Stowe Teachers College graduate, or a Harris Stowe Teachers College graduate, because now we're a university, and that can be a mixture of all different dynamics. So we do have a much different history when it comes to HBCUs. And then also to your other point, is because we're one of the smaller HBCUs in St. Louis, our endowment isn't as huge as some of the other HBCU endowments. And then also when we look at our alumni giving and some of those things, we're kind of like in that space that you talked about, how we have a lower alumni giving right now. So sometimes we don't always show up when you start talking about the HBCUs that are out there. There are certain HBCUs that you hear over and over and over again. Now, I will say this, we are making great strides right now. There are some wonderful things that are happening. We have 4 schools and colleges now, so we have education, we have arts and sciences, we have a school of business, and we just started a school of STEM. So we're growing, we're receiving funding, we're doing all those wonderful things. And like I said, as we continue to do this, we hope that our names start showing up more when people start talking about HBCUs, because I know right now it's not the case, but we're getting there.
Thank you, Jeff. I really wanted you to tell that story because every one of the HBCUs has its own story. Even if we are designated HBCUs, sitting here at Lincoln, that was part of the Underground Railroad, also established before the Civil War. And therefore, many of its first students were coming here as escapees. Many of the other, we had a number of African students who came here to learn in the Americas and returned to Africa, and it was a safe space to do that. So I appreciate your information about Harris Stowe. I think I learned some things today about Harris Stowe. But now moving to Carla, I wanted Carla, because of her experience inside and outside of HBCUs, to give us a sense of the people part with regard to philanthropy, our leadership and staff structures, and our donor mix. I will tell you as introduction, I've known Carla for about 15 or 16 years. We
Long time.
yeah, we connected as part of the CASE Minority Advancement Institute, which has been in existence since 2005. I was privileged enough to be part of the first cohort, and she and I both function as, whether it's formally or informally, as mentors to many advancement professionals of color. And so she has her thumb or something on the pulse of how professionals of color who serve everywhere, but certainly in HBCUs, are managing the current set of, challenges and opportunities. So, Carla, how would you describe the way that we are structured? It gives us a little bit of insight on what that previous data was like. Take it away.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ava. And I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to address this question, because one of the things I see when I'm working with HBCU clients compared to clients who are either private liberal arts institutions or large public institutions is smaller, slimmer staffing. And on its face, one might think, well, what does that have to do with it? Well, what I often see is larger, major, and principal gift level portfolios, and often mixed portfolios that have corporations, foundations, individual alumni, friends. And so one person trying to work with this myriad of different types of constituents. I often see one person, and this certainly was my experience at FAMU, and that's where I met Jeff. In fact, Jeff was a member of the staff, but often you have one staff member in advancement who might be doing 3 or 4 different jobs because the work has to get done. And, on one side of the coin, it's that person taking on so much, but on the other side of the coin, it's giving that person the opportunity to learn and experience so much in the field of advancement. So I see it sort of as a double-sided coin. When we think about people and we think about constituents, alumni and friends, especially alumni, I often see alumni more engaged in annual giving and in alumni event participation, and not as much in major and principal and planned giving. And so one of the things that's really important with people is helping people associated with HBCUs learn about the culture of philanthropy and why it's important and why they should give back, and to help instill in them that desire to give back. I want to go back to just have you think about one of the slides that Ava shared, and that was the slide that had at the bottom the 3 sort of connections that alumni of HBCUs have back to their institution. They have the linkage. I believe it's a matter of helping to share why it's important to give back and to encourage others to give back, because there is that sense of indebtedness. You had the faculty member who cared about you and really sort of nurtured you throughout the time you were an incoming freshman until you graduated. And many times HBCU alumni stay in touch with those folks who were influential in their lives while they were students. But I think it's teaching that culture of formalized philanthropy, because we have philanthropy. We give to the church, we give to organizations in our community. So it's not that there isn't philanthropy, but it's teaching that formalized culture of philanthropy within the higher ed institution. And then finally, I want to talk about corporations. We've touched upon corporations. Often, what I found with HBCUs is that alumni have wonderful positions, executive C-suite level positions within corporations, and they are often the ambassador or the conduit and connector to help their alma mater get funding from the corporations. And so that was certainly my experience at Florida A&M, where there was a really strong entity called the Business and Industry Cluster. And every year, twice a year, alumni who worked in corporate America, who happened to be graduates of Florida A&M University, would bring their CEOs and their C-suite executives back to the institution to engage with students, to engage with faculty, and to really help them learn the value of their alma mater and to see the quality and caliber of students who were graduating, to help identify students who could perhaps be considered for internships, and also to engage with faculty members to learn the value of inviting faculty members who were leaders in their fields to come into the corporate environment to sometimes do externships. So those are some of the ways in which I have seen kind of the people within HBCUs function as related to philanthropy. And certainly I'll go back to Florida A&M. Oftentimes when those corporate executives would come to the campus and experience the students and the caliber and quality of the students, more scholarships would come to the institution as a result of those experiences. Long answer. Hope I touched upon everything.
Yes, thank you, Carla. I'm going to ask one last question, but of both of you. What do you see as the future of philanthropy at HBCUs? We're in this sort of crevice between great upheaval and a response to that, and the desire to create a better culture of philanthropy at all of our schools. But from your perspectives, what do you see as the future, and how do we harness that future?
Jeff, you want first?
Sure, I can start it off. So I'm going to say, first of all, I'm very optimistic about the future of philanthropy for HBCUs. And the reason that I say that, part of the reason is, some of our HBCUs were gifted with some really transformational gifts, particularly like some of the Mackenzie Scott dollars that were able to come in. And those were large gifts, but they were also large unrestricted gifts. And which means that the university can kind of help move itself in the direction that it needs to move in without a lot of restraints on it. And because they were such large transformational gifts, I really believe that those universities that receive them are going to, 5 years, 10 years from now, you're going to see some really great transformations that are going to come out of that because they were given the flexibility to make some things happen. And based upon that, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a trend in seeing a lot of these HBCUs thriving and doing the work that they've always been doing, but doing it on another level, getting better at it. And the more people see the value in giving to HBCUs, I think the more philanthropy is going to start to come in. I think I look at some of the things that I've seen that some of the HBCUs that I've been at, and though I'm not seeing a large transformational gift like the ones that we've seen from Ms. Kinsey Scott, but we have seen funding come in where we're able to make some major changes at the university that are going to put our university in a much better situation. And as long as we're doing the right things, which I think we are, being good stewards of the money, using that money in the way that it's supposed to be used, I think people are going to start to see even more value in what's coming out of the HBCUs. To your point, Ava, earlier, you know, HBCUs make up 3% of all the schools and colleges. But when you start looking at the percentage of Black attorneys, Black dentists, Black lawyers, you know, Black judges, when you start looking at the percentage that the HBCUs are putting out, I mean, it's just incredible the work that the HBCUs are doing. So as long as we're able to continue that and do it in a way where now that we're starting to get more funding than we were getting before, I just think the trend for HBCUs moving forward is going to increase because people are going to start seeing the true value of what HBCUs are doing.
I couldn't
Thank you.
agree more, Jeff, and I too am optimistic. And there's another stat that I want to share. I remember this from our time at FAMU. If you go into a retail pharmacy, 1 in 3 Black pharmacists graduated from an HBCU. So just when the next time you go into your pharmacy and you encounter a Black pharmacist, he or she probably went to an HBCU. Additionally, I'm optimistic when you think about major and principal level gifts. As African Americans become more aware of the importance of giving back to their institutions and have that sort of economic mobility, and they are engaged in the life of philanthropy within their institutions, I think there will be more opportunity and we will see more examples of major and principal level gifts to HBCUs. Additionally, I'm optimistic because I think that technology is going to play a part in an increase in philanthropy from our alumni, in that we have more opportunities to participate in social media and different multimedia channels of giving and days of giving. And I think that too is going to provide more opportunity and I think more exposure to see an increase in giving back to HBCUs.
If I might,
if I can
question
add,
for the three of you. I mean, you're professionals at the craft of solicitation, and we all know if you don't ask, you're not going to get. You know, these are not autonomous gifts that just transform over the counter. I'm fascinated by the impact of HBCUs on society, as you've documented. The higher percentage of lawyers, doctors, etc. When you are out face to face with someone, what's your most compelling case for support? Is there something unique to the environment that makes an investment at your school, your university, the place that will provide the catalytic leverage to get someone from point A to point Z? The way the data is showing? I mean, what's so distinctive about the experience that would warrant the major gift or the principal gift that Carla is talking about?
That's a great question, Scott. And I think that it is, it's going to be one of your favorite answers. Well, it depends. In that it depends on who you are talking to, right? So Carla talked about doing things that will engage further our internal clients, right? Our alumni, parents, even, friends who are somewhat knowledgeable about who you are and what you do. But then we have to have another message for people we would consider our friends. So they're a little bit outside of the circle. They may be local to the community. Lincoln sits in Chester County, Pennsylvania. It's about 40 miles away from Philadelphia proper, but we're probably 6-7 miles away from Cheney University. We're about, I don't know, 30 or so miles away from Delaware State. And so there are specific messages that we give to our local community, potential donors, and then to those corporate and foundation potential donors, some of whom have a foothold in the local communities, some of whom are more national in scope, that we're trying to provide graduates to work in those industries. That's when those statistics about the 1 in 3 African-American pharmacists, or 80% of the judges that are Black being from HBCUs, that's where we start to make sure that people understand that information. Because again, I know it may seem crazy, but there are a lot of people who seemingly were not really informed about the value of HBCUs until fairly recently. And so we've got to continue the data streams. We have to continue those kinds of conversations, but they do shift when you're talking to someone who knows a little bit more, or someone who's actually had that experience, to when you're talking to people who are just now learning that a school that was founded in 1854 is down the street from you. So I don't know, Jeff, Carla, would you agree?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would agree.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I agree, and I'd be happy to add a little more to that because, like you say, it is different for the different groups that you're talking to, and specifically, I know for me in my region, when I talk to a lot of the corporations that I look for funding for, one of the main things that I stress is, one, a lot of the corporations, they're looking for that diversity, equity, inclusion. They're looking to raise the number of minorities in their organization. So, you know, what is your best bet to get that from? You know, the HBCU down the street from you would be the best bet to work with if you're trying to increase that. And then the other piece that I add to that is I say, look at our alumni. Most of our alumni are right here in St. Louis. They're from St. Louis. They tend to stay in St. Louis. We have WashU, we have St. Louis University, we have Mizzou, and a lot of those minority students come from all over the country. And when they graduate, they go back to wherever they came from, you know. However, our St. Louis students that are here at Harris Stowe tend to stay right here. So if you want to make an investment in a student that improves your company locally, your best bet is here at Harris Stowe. And that's usually the key that I usually use to get them interested. Is not only do they want to increase their diversity, but they want a student that's probably going to want to stay in town. And that's what we're able to provide for them.
I agree with what Jeff said, and I would kind of sum it up in one word, and that's storytelling. I think it's compelling storytelling about your institution. What sets you apart from other institutions? What is it that your graduates are going to do to change the world in the future that's different from any other institution? At Harris Stowe, not only is it teaching, but it's STEM, and this strong emphasis in STEM. There are a couple of institutions that are currently really focused on aviation. So it's, what is your story that sets you apart from others? And just, you know, sharing that compelling case for support in telling a good story.
I agree. One of the last slides that I wanted to share shows some of the notable and sort of new support that HBCUs have received. So I will start with those sources that have been somewhat historical and have been sort of for us, by us. So the United Negro College Fund, which many people are familiar with, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. They have been around since 1944 and have been a major advocate for colleges that are HBCUs and for those students. They, in principle, support private HBCUs. However, when the Thurgood Marshall Fund was developed in 1987, which principally supports the more state-related or state-funded HBCUs, they became great partners. I think in recent years, United Negro College Fund and Thurgood Marshall College Fund are working together. In fact, there was a news release just last week, I believe, where UNCF and Thurgood Marshall worked together with the Blue Meridian Partners, which are a group of philanthropists, and they have awarded $124 million. Of course, it will be distributed among a number of HBCUs. Most of that money will go to support infrastructure changes, technology needs, and those sorts of things. So UNCF and Thurgood Marshall have been around for a long time, but they are finding the coalition of the two to be a strong driver for bringing in more dollars. I would move on to say that AKA Alpha Kappa Alpha is just one example of one of the, if you aren't familiar with the Divine Nine, which are the African American fraternities and sororities, but they recently announced a group of $50,000 endowment gifts to more than 20 HBCUs. That is critical because most HBCUs, I would say 90 out of the 100 or so, have endowments that are less, and some far less than $100 million. And so when you contrast that against schools that have endowments in the billions, and that kind of money is what helps you to address unrestricted needs, then this gift from the AKAs is really kind of critical. The Links, which is another community focused organization of women that are African American, recently made $1 million gift to HBCUs. In 2014, a gentleman named John Thompson made a $5 million gift to FAMU. That was their largest single private gift in history. So again, the landscape looks brighter, but we have to keep it going. Robert F. Smith, many of you probably saw on TV, the billionaire who paid off student loans as quite a surprise at the 2019 graduation at Morehouse. And then there are allies of ours. So Reed Hastings, whose name you may not know, but he's part of the Netflix empire, recently gifted to HBCUs and UNCF $120 million, splitting that 40 million apiece. And then of course, everyone has heard about Mackenzie Scott and her giving, which again was unrestricted giving, which is tremendous. I will say that Lincoln was one of the grateful recipients of one of her gifts. So I wanted to put that out there because, and there are more. For instance, Jay-Z and Beyonce teamed up with Tiffany's and Company to create scholarships for students that are in the creative majors, not STEM, not teaching. This is an unusual group of students to get scholarships, but out of their career aspirations, they felt like it was important to support students in the creative areas. And so 5 HBCUs were recipients of those scholarship dollars. So just as Jeff and Carla have suggested, our thoughts about what will happen soon or what is beginning to happen are that there is a bright future. But I wouldn't say that the struggle has ended. The struggle is real. But we are grateful that people, whether they're just learning or have just figured out how they can support, are getting into the fray with us. And as that continues, our future is bright. And we hope that some people on this webinar have learned something that maybe they didn't know before, and have a sense of what is happening currently, what we've been trying to promote and help people to understand. And, you know, if you've got questions, while I'm not sure that I'm entirely the best expert. I know a little bit about this, and you can certainly reach me, and I can connect you to my colleagues, and there are so many more. If we had been really, really exhaustive, there would be 100 people representing the 100 schools on this one webinar, because it would take that much to describe each one of the institutions and what is special and different, and that describes them. Since Jeff told you a little bit about Harris Stowe, I will just tell you that when I went to Oakwood, our logo or our slogan was "Enter to learn, depart to serve." I know the current logo is "Success has an address, and it is Oakwood University." So I will, at this point, I will entertain, I don't know, Scott, if we have any questions or anything that we can answer now, or if we will just provide the recording to participants.
At this minute, there's nothing in the Q&A. I think you three have done a marvelous job of addressing the issue. I've got one top of mind because Carla started with the concept about I'll refer to it as the leanness of the advancement province within the table of organization. And so my question is related to the three of you regarding what some of us might refer to as capitalization gifts. Are there opportunities for additional support for things like new technology that might expedite the work you're doing? Is there a need simply for another staff member to handle the portfolio that's required? You mentioned that earlier, Carla. What from an operational standpoint, where would you, if given a basket full of eggs, place them?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think in two, if I had two eggs, one would be additional major giving staff, but the second egg would be in the area of prospect research, because that's also an area that is often lean. And if you don't have good data on your alumni, then you don't always know who are the alums who have acquired great wealth. And so I think I would put the staffing in those two areas. To me, those are the two most important areas.
Jeff, what would you do?
I agree. Staffing is definitely important. And I had the pleasure and I was offered the opportunity to visit Rice University, which was down the street from where I was in Texas. And I was able to go through their Center for Philanthropy program there. And one of the things that I was blown away by is when I met with the folks at Rice, they had an annual giving department of 17 people, just annual giving. Now, every university that I've been at, because I've been at all HBCUs, we've had one annual giving person, if that. Sometimes you didn't always have an annual giving person. But if you did have one, it was one person, and they handled annual giving. They handled direct mail. They handled email. They handled the 80s and the 90s and all of these other affinity groups. They did it all, But so to have 17 just kind of blew me away. So staffing is definitely an issue. And like Carla mentioned, major gift officers or just gift officers in general, either the mid-level or the major gift officers, just having more frontline fundraisers is one of the things that I've seen not happen at some of our schools. Sometimes you have one chief person who's the frontline fundraiser, and they may not have anybody under them. So just having more frontline fundraisers is definitely important. And then on the advancement services side, definitely have somebody who knows what they're doing with the database system, having a prospect researcher, and somebody who's managing and keeping an eye on that data. So like Carla said, you want to know where your alumni are. You want to make sure you have good addresses. You want all of that good stuff. So just beefing up the advancement services or just the advancement office in general is very, very crucial.
I thought of one additional one, Scott, and that would also be this emerging field of data analytics. Because if you have a robust database and you have all the bells and whistles. You need to have a person, or even if that person has a different job title and they're focusing primarily on something else within advancement, someone who understands how to interpret and analyze the data, because it's all there, but you need to have a person who understands how to mine that data.
Absolutely.
And
I think that those answers are spot on. And I think that all of us have experienced that moment where it's like, I could get out of the office, or I could be in the office and try to figure out what this report is telling me. So then I've got to ask some people for some money, but I've got to be clear on who they are before I meet them. What's the size of the fee I need to be asking for, all of those things. And so, I think, back to Scott's original question, if we had a magic wand or a basket full of money or something, it would be how to either increase those staffs, or certainly, I think we've begun to talk a lot about how we create coalitions among us that will help us in some of those back office areas. Particularly, Jeff is a specialist in advancement services, and so those outline the challenges, really.
So, do you have any advice?
And if I could just say, if I can say one other thing, Scott, this every university that I've worked at, HBCU and otherwise, software has never been an issue. We've always had top of the line, best software at every one of those universities. So that's why I bring it back to having the right people, the right staff, the right, gift officers, advanced services people, because I've never run into a university where they just didn't have software. They usually have whatever Razor's Edge or whatever is top of the line. They usually have done that part, but having the right staff is very, very important.
Right.
And then one question came through, and that would be, what would your advice be to create more opportunities for fundraising at HBCUs?
So outside of having the opportunity to have more people on the ground, boots on the ground, I think, and when I go back to the comment I made about UNCF and Thurgood Marshall College Fund now working more closely together, I would suggest that we all spend time making those connections among us. Again, it's back to that power in numbers. And because among us, even though each one of us has our distinctive, college lore to share, among us, we're making some inroads because we are joining together to get this work done.
I would say, when I talked about people earlier, a couple of groups of people I did not talk about, and that's university cabinet members, presidents, leaders, boards. I go back to what I shared earlier about storytelling. I think more opportunities are created when university chancellors and presidents and board of trustee members and foundation board members are out telling the story of the wonderful work that is happening as a result of those being educated within the HBCU. And so more storytelling to the right audiences, I think, will lead to more fundraising opportunities.
And for me, another thing is this, and I promise you, she did not pay me to say this, but we need to create more fundraisers. I'm a fundraiser because of Carla. I was not a fundraiser. I was an IT guy. And Carla took me out of my comfort zone of IT and massaged me into annual giving and more fundraising stuff. And I think as leaders, we need to do more of that. And I try to do that with my students, bringing them in as work study and not just having them run and grab food, but actually getting them into the fundraising piece of it, having them do stewardship videos, having them write letters, just getting them to understand what philanthropy is, having students do our phonathons and things like that. I think it gets them interested in the culture of philanthropy. And I think if we as leaders do more of taking some of the people that are in our advancement offices and showing them what this whole advancement thing is and start molding them into fundraisers. I think if we had more people who do that, like what Carla did for me, I think we can create more fundraisers.
And Jeff, I want to thank you. I think you just created a topic for an upcoming session. We could focus on coaching and training. And I think you've got sort of a universal pitch there. We've hit our 3 o'clock Eastern hard stop, and so you've been dynamic with your thoughts, with your insight, and sharing. I love the collaboration. We will get this video condensed to a point where people can come to the site and download it. We'll send a follow-up email out with a copy of the slide deck. I just really want to thank you all for your advice and professionalism and expertise. It's been enlightening, and trust we'll do this again in the near future. Topic to be determined.